Hi, Quilty friends. I had a meeting last week about how nobody likes my tone, and the US government is searching people's electronic devices at the border, even citizens, without cause. So, if you need to feel better, maybe making this quilty pouch will help. It's made entirely by hand, no machine needed, and this one is really rainbow and adorable. But first, please like and subscribe if you haven't so that you can get more tutorials like this. No frills, quick tutorials about how you could jump right into sewing. Let's get going. Check for a supply list in the description before you start. Step 1 is to baste 29 hexes. This is the kitty litter line by Dear Stella, and it's adorable. Then sew your hexes together into a sheet like this. Finally, flip it over and remove the papers. If you need more information about sewing your hexes together or basting your hexes, I'll link videos about those specific steps below. You really do not have to be careful when removing these papers. Don't rip your stitches, but otherwise, just do what you need to do. You'll be trimming the edges so they don't have to stay in a hexagon shape. Next, you want to make your quilt sandwich with a piece of fabric, a piece of batting, and finally, your EPP panel. Put these together, and then you could use a stitch to baste them together. This is just a stitch that goes through all layers once, then twice, and then you tie a knot. These are basting stitches, so they're going to be cut out later, so they don't have to look nice. Another option is that you can use safety pins. Put some safety pins or stitches here and there so that the whole piece is not going to move. Next, take the outline of your shape and trace around it. You want to make sure that your quilting stitches and the knots don't go outside this outline, so it's important to draw it on now. You will be cutting this off later, so you could use any marker that you want. Now, it's time to quilt the piece. You want to start off in the center so that if there's movement of the 3 layers, you could compensate for it. Although any stitch going through all layers counts as quilting, we usually use a running stitch. Here you can see just going up and down through all the layers makes a nice running stitch. This does not have to be perfect. I like to grasp my needle between my fingers, but I don't put a finger behind the needle. That's why I don't use a thimble. But if you put your finger behind the needle to push it through, you're probably going to want to use a needle for this part. Here's a friendly reminder that if you wanted your stitches to be perfect, you would use a machine. And part of the reason that this looks so nice is because it's very clear that it is handmade. Don't worry about perfection. I'll link a video below about how to bury your knot, but here's a great example of why you do it on the back of your project. When I pull this knot through, it makes a pull in the nearby fabric. I'm going to show you that again. When the knot pulls through, the orange fabric pulls. Next, you want to remove your basting stitches or your safety pins. Use fabric scissors to trim around the outline you drew earlier. All of your stitches, including your knots, should be inside this outline, so you shouldn't have any trouble cutting it. Next, we're going to bind the oval with a 2.5 by width of fabric strip. Fold the corner down like this before you start, and then the whole strip is going to be folded in half lengthwise. This is going to set you up for the end being a lot easier to join. I finger pressed this and then pressed it with an iron, just so that it's ready to go. There are lots of ways to join binding, but I think this is the easiest way, and if you haven't tried it before, this small project is a good excuse. Take your binding, and you want to find the edge that you just folded the end down. I did not use a folded binding edge here, but you're going to want to use that. Take your binding and line up the raw edge of your binding with the raw edge of your project. You want to place a few clips to hold the binding in place. And again, remember, In this example, the edge of my binding is just square, but we're really going to want to use the binding that we just folded in this part. You're going to want to start this clipping and sewing on the straight part of this oval, not on the rounded edge. Start sewing here by taking a bite through the 2 layers of binding and at least the first layer of the project quilt sandwich. You're going to do a back stitch. Notice that I didn't start at the beginning of the binding. I left a few inches. This is about a 1/4 inch away from the edge of the binding. I measure it that one time, but the rest of the time I'm sewing, I'm going to use these little clips to approximate 1/4 of an inch from the edge. Back stitch around the perimeter, taking especially small bites around the curved edges. Here's a close-up view. My needle goes in and comes out, and it goes back in behind where the prior stitch had come out. That little clip is telling me that I'm 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. These stitches should be right next to each other. Once we've come all around the perimeter, we're going to have to join the 2 ends of our binding. Here I'm going to fold down the edge of the binding, but you'll remember that you already did this, so yours should already be folded. If not, this is how you make it work on the fly. I use the scissors to push in the edge here, and it's going to make the edge look folded just as though I had done it in the beginning. Next, take the other edge of your binding and cut it a few inches past the folded portion of the binding that you just fixed. I cut mine at an angle. Honestly, I'm not sure why. And then I'm just going to shove this in the fold of the other side of the binding. You could use your finger or your scissors to carefully do that. And then just straighten the edge so that it lays nicely. Now all you have to do is backstitch across this area to hold it down. I use some clips to both hold this in place and to show me how big a 1/4 of an inch is. Once that's done, you can fold the binding back to the other side of your project. I do this a little bit at a time and clip it as I go. If you can see your stitches like this, it might mean that that area isn't tight enough. Open it and flip it back and just put a few extra stitches there to tighten up the seam. This will make those stitches not be as visible from the front. To sew down the edge of your binding, you want to use a relatively invisible stitch. I have a video that I'm going to link below about this, but we'll show you here as well. You're going to take a bite of the quilt sandwich, so that's the aqua fabric, and then come up right on the edge of the pink binding. So every stitch is going to be a bite of the aqua fabric and then coming up right on the edge of the pink binding. The goal is for this to be mostly invisible, but honestly, the inside edge is going to be inside your pouch anyway, so don't worry. Here's a close-up view. A bite of the quilt sandwich, and then come up right on the edge of that binding. You can use a color thread that's the same as your binding if you want this to be even more invisible, but I honestly don't care that much about that. As I go around the circle, I'm going to move my clips so that they're always holding down the area that I'm working on. And just like before, when you go around the actual corner where it is rounded, you want to take smaller stitches. This helps prevent it from bunching. These stitches should be catching the blue fabric and maybe some of the batting, but they shouldn't be going through the front of the project. Every once in a while, I flip it over and look and make sure that I'm not going through the front. All right, don't panic, but it's time to put the zipper on. Take your zipper and fold it in half so that you know where the center is, and mark that with a clip. You want one on both sides of the zipper tape. Now, fold your pouch in half the long way and mark the center with a clip. Okay, put your zipper with the zipper pull to the left with an open zipper and line up the bottom zipper tape. The zipper tape here is face up and the project is face up, so it's right side to wrong side. You're going to use a bunch of clips here to clip it around the curve. This is what it looks like from the back. You could use as many clips as you want, but more is sometimes better. Next, you're going to sew the zipper tape to the binding, so to that pink binding. This stitch should be going through the zipper tape and through one layer of the binding, but not through the whole project. You don't want to be able to see this on the front of the pouch. You can do a running stitch here, but I tend to think that a back stitch is better so that this line of stitches is tighter. Here you're going to just see that close up. This is just a back stitch, and it's about 1/8 of an inch from the bottom of the zipper teeth. And it doesn't really matter, honestly. If you see a little bit more of the zipper tape, some people like that look. You just want to make sure that you're catching the back of that binding and not going through to the front of the binding. As you keep going, you're going to take off clips and replace them on the bottom end. You always want the edge that you are working on to be clipped down in place, either by the last stitches or by a clip coming up. Take small stitches so that the curve is nice, and eventually you will get all the way to the end. You do want to stitch the very end of your zipper tape down so that the entire zipper tape is hidden under the binding. You could see that there's a little bit of that pink binding that peeks out there. At the very end, you want to put a knot here. And depending on how much you care about finishing, you can do a good job of hiding the knot, although that is not what I did here. All right, so the middle of your opposite edge and the middle of the opposite zipper tape are both marked here. You're going to fold your pouch in half, right side to right side, and flip over your zipper. I'm going to show you that again. The middle of your opposite zipper tape is marked, right side to right side, okay? And then flip the whole zipper upside down. So it's laying on top of those two edges. And then you're going to pin the zipper tape to the middle of the other edge of your oval. Again, you're going to use a bunch of clips to clip this down. And I think that it is easiest to start sewing on the edge where the zipper pull is not. Notice this zipper is left open during the sewing here. So I'm going to do the exact same thing as before. I'm going to sew down the zipper tape to the bottom of the binding here, being careful that my stitches do not go through to the front of the binding. These are about 1/8 of an inch away from the top of the zipper tape here. But again, it doesn't really matter because if you see a little bit more of that zipper tape from the front, some people like the way that looks. When you get all the way to the end, just make sure that you sew the zipper tape down all the way to the end so that it's not poking out into your pouch. It will catch on everything if you leave a little bit unsewn there. This part is optional, but I like to do another running stitch along the very edge of my zipper tape to hold it down against the pouch. You can see here that wavy edges of that zipper tape are sticking up, and I don't like them getting caught on things. So I like to sew this edge down. But again, this part is optional. You can kind of decide whether or not you think that this is important. You can see here how nice that these edges are because they're sewn down. They're nice and smooth when you run your finger across them. Next, all you have to do is close the two sides of the binding that don't have zipper tape. If the edge isn't laying nicely, use the point of your scissors or your needle to just straighten that out. Now hold the two sides together and whip stitch the two edges together to close off this hole. I'm using a thread here that matches the binding so that it's less visible, but it's also going to be on the inside bottom of your pouch, so you're really not going to see it. When you get all the way up near your zipper tape, you want to make sure to close the binding all the way up to where the zipper starts so that there's not a hole there. I like to open it up a little bit like this so that I could see exactly where the edges come apart. And again, you want to take stitches all the way up until you get to your zipper pull. Lock those stitches every once in a while because this is the part of your pouch that's going to get the most stress. And now is the best part. You get to flip this inside out. Depending on how strong your seams are, be very careful pushing these edges out because you could make a hole in your seam if you are aggressive. Ask me how I know that. And there you have it. You made a zipper pouch entirely by hand. Congratulations, and we'll see you next time on the Surgical Sewist.